Howdy, folks. Double J back here, coming at you live from my studio / RV dining room located in and around the Appalachia region. I will be your pilot and navigator this evening for this shenanigan infused journey into the mind of this particular garbage can dude. And joining me here tonight is my dude Dan Dean, aka I Don't Eat Cats, coming directly from little Haiti, aka Springfield, Ohio. How you doing, Dave?
That is correct. I do not eat cats. Not necessarily a moniker I have given myself, but I wanted to make sure everyone knew that, knowing where I'm situated currently.
Nice. Well, I mean, it is good to clear that up. Springfield does seem to be a hot spot of cat eating activity these days.
Yeah, that's you mentioned Springfield. People know that there's cat eating happening.
Yeah. Surprised there's not a turf war between the local Asian buffet restaurants and the local Haiti population, over the cats.
As far as that goes, I know for sure that a couple of those restaurants have been either shut down or given some warnings by the health department for said activities.
Said cat feasts.
Yeah, apparently they had some shit in their freezer, but there was a loophole. They claimed that it was for personal consumption. So
okay.
They got by with it. They just had to get rid of it off the premises.
Yeah, I don't even know if I'd feel comfortable eating at an establishment that is calling it for personal consumption, such things as cat.
Correct.
I immediately question all the activities at that point, and I don't believe them. I don't believe them.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you. They shut down for a little while after that. I think it was a PR move. But they're currently open again, and they're back to
same ownership probably too, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't. Yeah. I remember a few questionable eating it. I remember because if you recall, I don't know if you recall, Dan, and folks of the interwebs, I spent some time in Springfield in my military career. In fact, I was brought in as to basically babysit. I guess not really babysit. That's not the right word to say. But it's basically called in on active duty to take about 25 college students over to Iraq that were part of the Ohio Air National Guard out of Springfield. And, a few of them was like babysitting, I suppose. Some of them were obviously immature. And, it was part of that program of let's send all these college kids that we coerced into joining the National Guard. Let's send them to war. And I remember sitting in D.C. thinking, well, that's not a good idea. Take some of those troops over to Iraq. But yeah, I remember going to Springfield quite a bit back then, back circa 2011, and there was a number of restaurants and eating establishments that I simply would not frequent. I heard a lot of bad stories about things. So
they're questionable, but there are some good ones.
Which is funny to me now because now everyone seems like they're culinary experts in town, right? Like, the Haitians are eating the goose,
right?
The ducks, they're eating the cats, like. Well, since when did you guys not eat, roadkill and cats? Right. Or maybe not cats, but certainly roadkill. You know what I mean? There's certainly, it's not out of by any means of the Springfield region. I don't think you'd by any means. Sure, you've witnessed it before in the area. Folks, stopping this fresh roadkill.
Listen, if I watch a deer get hit, I might very well get out myself and go ahead and field dress that thing.
Suddenly, everyone's hypocrites and culinary experts. You can't be eating the duck or the geese now.
I'm all for the geese eating. Fuck those geese. Right. Geese are a bunch of cunts, is what they are. As far as everything else, I haven't seen any proof.
It is funny to me the level of subs that have now encircled the Springfield, Ohio region. I mean, it seems to be like PSYOP Central right now between the cat eating, the goose, the ducks, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's gone straight to the top as far as that goes.
Oh, Elon Musk is tweeting it, so it's fact. I mean, even if it's not fact, when Donald Trump's saying it in speeches, Elon Musk is tweeting it.
Yeah,
it's fact.
Those two said it, and a lot of people talking about it. And don't get me wrong, I've made 6 or 7 joke posts about it. It's a plethora of comedic fodder.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it is funny though, because Elon Musk will be getting like I don't know, probably 20 million views, eyes on, like a lot of his tweets and whatnot. So that's what the sort of quote unquote news program can never produce, right? Like, relatively speaking, like the two don't even compare.
Oh, not even close. Not even close.
And you're talking, you know, exponentially larger volume of eyes on the Elon Musk news tweets, the Elon news service, as opposed to traditional media, you know, outlets,
right.
Traditional media services, if you will. It's essentially how he operates. He's always trying to tweet the topical stuff, right?
Yeah, I think he usually. I don't know. I don't follow the guy.
I follow. He seems to like want to operate his own little wire service.
Yeah, he. I have seen a couple people kind of resharing some of the things that he shares, and I don't know what's happening here. I think you've kind of frozen up again. So
and the back.
There you are. Okay, I was just going to.
I just think it's fascinating. You know, just given the volume of people that look at his feed and his tweets and his little news feed that he likes to distribute. You know, it's a different time with.
He seems to want to have some fun with it. You know, some of them may be factual, some of them may not be, but he seems to enjoy whatever's going on there, and I feel like he sits back. All right.
Well, when you live in a van down by the river, that's what I got going on back here. Speaking of Elon Musk, I'm using his Gremlins right now on my Starlink satellite, and it says it's lined up. I was just looking at it. It's not to be an infomercial or anti-infomercial for Starlink. It does usually work pretty well, but right now it seems to be cutting out.
Well, I guess you go with what you can when you can.
I can't complain. It's better than any of these competitor services. I tested some other ones out, and I was not impressed. T-Mobile, get them back to Germany. Those Nazis can keep their little home internet service. That was terrible.
Well, in Springfield, actually, they have pretty good internet service. They paid to have fiber optic cables run. Oh. They're supposed to be every home in the county is supposed to be able to have access to that high-speed internet. I don't think they've quite gotten that far yet, but they've made it available to a lot of people.
Well, this is T-Mobile.
No. I think it's Spectrum.
Oh, okay. Nice.
But I'm, I was just kind of saying there is a good option as far as internet. To be honest, I don't know how great it is. I don't have it personally, but
I can tell you one thing: T-Mobile's cell phone service in Springfield.
Yeah,
right when I drive into Springfield, it literally goes down to one bar. And I drive out and it goes back to full service. It's not a valley thing. I see towers, right?
No, I think it's all the goddamn Haitians using up all the fucking
using up all the bandwidth. That's a good point. That actually might impact it quite a bit, right? Yeah.
I mean,
if you only have so many towers in an area and you put 20,000 new people right there, that could certainly, because like you've been to like a football game or something, right?
Yeah,
yeah. Bengals games, and you go to Bengals games and suddenly your cell phone wouldn't work.
Right. And, you're talking about putting 20,000 new people in an area that, if you put 20,000 people in New York City, that's a little bit different than putting 20,000 people in Springfield, which only has 60,000 to begin with. So, you're putting 25% again, people.
That's a good point. That may be, in fact, what's going on. Because I see T-Mobile stores there. I'm like, well, they got T-Mobile service. How are they selling service if it sucks? But yeah, if it's just overloaded, sure. I can see that being an issue.
They're probably cheaper too. T-Mobile's probably a lot cheaper than like AT&T.
Oh, absolutely, so much cheaper. And tonight's conversation, right down the road from Springfield, is going to be circling around the city of Dayton. We're talking vampires, man, fucking vampires.
Now, listen, this whole Dayton vampire thing. They might be responsible for the Haitians coming to Springfield. I think they're trying to get the heat off of them, get the spotlight away from whatever's happening over in Dayton.
You know what? I mean, I understand that's probably a statement likely made in jest, and I do enjoy that. However, I think you might be onto something. It's potential because we're talking one of the largest vampire covens, apparently, outside of New Orleans.
Yeah, it's supposed to be the second largest in the country.
Yeah, I kind of looked into that, and we'll go into those details later.
I tried to look into it. Did you find anything about the Dayton Vampire Coven other that didn't say Netflix?
No. So the folks that did the survey, they don't publish their results really. They'll publish the meta analysis of it, like the total numbers, but they don't give the breakdown of where all these people answered the survey from. So allegedly, what happened there was a group out of a vampire lobby, if you will. We'll call it the vampire lobby out of Atlanta. They were they do a survey every few years. It's not like a one-time thing, but they ask folks I don't know how they disseminate this. They're not clear about any of these details. However, what they do is apparently ask folks, "Are you a vampire or are you not a vampire?" And apparently 5,000 of those people said
5,000
vampire.
That's the number I live in Dayton. Yeah, I think it's 5,000 nationwide, isn't it?
No, I think that's. Oh, is it nationwide?
I think it's 5,000 nationwide.
That seems way more reasonable because I lived in Dayton. I know you've lived in Dayton. I've never.
Well, now let's just back up a little bit. I live near Dayton.
Well, you attended college in and around Dayton.
I did. I did attend college in Dayton.
So you were routinely, involved in social circumstances. You met a lot of folks around there.
Oh yeah.
I was stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So like I said, I was brought into Springfield for a stint. So I, got acclimated to that region for about 6 months and those people. And I've never met a vampire in that region.
Now let's not jump to conclusions here. I am of the belief that we have probably all met vampires and interacted with vampires, and they have probably ravaged our bodies in total and sucked our blood. But then they put a glamour on you so you forget.
Is that what happens? Okay.
That's what vampires do. They'll put a glamour on you.
They're known for that, aren't they? It's like the Will Smith Men in Black little phaser device, is it?
It's kind of like that. But it's inherent. It's a natural thing to them. And, they've got to feed somehow.
Sure.
So, I am of the firm belief that we've probably all interacted with vampires, but we just don't remember.
Interesting. Well, I don't know. I, for one, at least, I like your theory. Is that you really can't prove it or disprove it, especially if you got glamored by a vampire. How are you going to know?
That's exactly right.
They're going to wipe you clean.
That's exactly right. They cover their tracks.
They're shifty, these vampires. So I've actually encountered a number of vampires in my life. Strange as I can make that statement, and it is factual. One of which, I feel like vampires were bigger in the 90s, maybe. I'm not just thinking Wesley Snipes' Blade. I'm thinking Interview with a Vampire.
Yeah, you had the Lost Boys, Interview with the Vampire.
Lost Boys, vampire film.
Yeah, hell yeah.
What's the one with Quentin Tarantino and George Clooney?
From Dusk Till Dawn.
There was
my favorite
vampire one
of the vampire series.
So lots of vampire stuff going on in the 90s.
Yeah.
Specifically Blade relative to Tonight's Tale, because the first time I saw that was in Murray, Kentucky. And I was on my senior year of high school spring break. And this is when I encountered my second group of vampires. Or not like I didn't personally meet these vampires. However, I was given a tour of their vampire activities from somebody who was one of the foster families for the head vampire. Or the one that got, at least the leader vampire that got convicted of murder in their little multi-state murder spree. His name was Rod Farrell.
Yeah,
right. And we're going to get into some of those details here tonight about the Kentucky vampire cult, the Dayton vampire situation, which Netflix just put the kibosh on that documentary for some reason, and the details of why they canceled it are unclear.
I think they're pretty clear. I think they are pretty clear. For the same reason, if you Google Dayton Vampire Coven, you're not going to find a goddamn thing.
Find shit. Yeah,
there's nothing. Everything says Netflix. Everything's about Netflix canceling that series. Otherwise, there's not a goddamn thing. Everybody's talking about Dayton vampires, but you can't find shit about them when you search it.
That's true. So what you're inferring in this scenario, if I'm understanding you correctly, sir, is these folks, the Netflix people, the producers of the film, perhaps they want to keep their blood and neck intact without any fangs up in there, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I do. And then
I mean, it's a reasonable conclusion.
Yeah, then the vampires glamored Google.
Oh, and have deleted all the Google results.
Yeah, they glamored the shit out of them, all of them. So they're all gone, and now all we have to go by is an alleged documentary that Netflix supposedly.
Yeah, there's no proof they even made it. Maybe that's more of a glamour. No. Maybe they glamored the people who made the documentary into thinking they made it.
Right.
A lot of glamoring going on here.
Yeah.
I think these are viable options, though, because it is very bizarre.
Yeah, they're sneaky.
Yeah, they are, for sure. Yeah, so I encountered that vampire cult in the aftermath of the killings, like about 2 years later. But again, got a full tour of that situation. And that's actually where the title of this tale this evening comes from. Vampires, man. Fucking vampires.
Fucking vampires.
So I'm in Murray, Kentucky. Well, let me take that back a notch because I'll get into that story here when we get started. We have a number of guests joining us. Nick and Lisa from the Occult Rejects, which is I'm a fellow Occult Rejects. I often appear on their program doing a number of topics of true crime and occult natures. And then Dr. Inferno will be joining us. He's a Kentucky native and knows a lot about the history of these, not just the homicidal vampire cult from Murray, Kentucky. There was one that's on the southwestern corner of the state near Paducah. The opposite corner, the southeastern corner, there was another mid-90s vampire cult, and they both claim origins from the same role-playing game. Now, I don't know a lot about these role-playing games. You familiar with what I'm talking about? Vampire Masquerade, I think it's what it's
Masquerade,
called.
Because, again, back to the 90s, there was a television show called Vampire the Masquerade.
Oh, I had no idea.
It was only on for one season, but in the 90s, it was my shit, man. Nice. I loved that show. It was the best fucking vampire show. I can't believe it got canceled after one season because it was fucking fantastic. If you get a chance,
well,
I haven't seen it.
I'm not familiar with it whatsoever, but it sounds like you know exactly where some of the origin story of this stuff comes from. Then, at least
since I watched that show. Yeah, since I watched that show, I got a hold of a copy of that game, the Vampire the Masquerade, and the game was fucking stupid. I was like, what is this shit? Why do people like this so much? But it spawned that series, and I loved the shit out of that series.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I understand why it was so popular amongst a certain group, including your buddy Rod.
What yeah, right. What network was this on in the 90s? Was this like a USA network type of deal, or are we talking like CW?
No, WB, it would have been on network TV, probably like a Fox or some shit like that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know exactly which one, but I lived out in the.
I totally missed it.
We didn't.
To be honest with you,
satellite or anything. So
it would have been one of the main networks.
Yeah, it would have been ABC, NBC, CBS, or Fox.
I mean, I'm not going to lie to you, though, Dan. I completely missed this television show, but I've been a big fan of TV and movies kind of all my life. But at the same time, like, I've been, to be completely honest, to say, like, I like to live in my own world sometimes. Yeah. Because when I went to Murray, Kentucky, I had no idea these murders, this vampire cult, none of these things were even anywhere. I'd never heard a lick of it. And it was all over the news. These were all very topical things at the time, and between 96 and 98. I just, no different than today or back then. I'm doing my own thing, and I'm not really paying attention to a lot of those kind of things. So when I first heard about a lot of these vampire details, it was so foreign to me. I'm like, vampire cults? They murdered people. What are you talking about?
In that particular one that you're talking about, and the only reason I know this is because you sent me a link to your buddy Rod there. Those murders were not done in a very vampiric way.
No, it was a ritual human sacrifice by their own accords, but according to Rod Farrell and his testimony and stuff. You got a spell book. There was, and I'm glad you brought that point up because that's actually included here in tonight's discussion as well. As the prevailing social narrative is that these vampire cults originated from this vampire role-playing game atmosphere. However, I think that's false. There seems to be this vampire element of Satanism where these main level satanic cults, they have orders of vampires and elements of vampires included into their philosophy. So I suspect the reason why Rod Farrell had a spell book doing a ritual human sacrifice was because he was a Satanist. He was just part of one of these vampiric orders. And on that note, the prevailing narrative was that they were a bunch of lost teenagers. There was adults in that cult. Rod Farrell's own mother was in that cult. That's how he got into the cult. So that's why when I say he was the head, I mean he was the figurehead purported in the media, but by all accounts and by the witness accounts that I got firsthand, there was adults in that cult. So it's not like something like the vampire's mother, who was a former vampire, is saying like, oh, I was in that cult. I mean, no, there was legitimate reports of adults being in that cult. So yeah, I think it's interesting. They claim they're vampires. Yeah, when they kill somebody, though, it gets real human-like.
Yeah, the ones I read about said he beat him with a crowbar or some shit. I'm like, vampires don't beat people with crowbars. What the fuck are we talking about here?
Yeah, then I think they lit it on fire or something like that.
I don't know.
Yeah, or lit the bodies on fire. There was some fire portion of the ritual, from my understanding. But yeah, and then they went to New Orleans after that.
And joined the largest coven in the country.
Was started there, Murray? What's that?
I said, or did they start the largest coven?
That's yeah.
That's where the largest one is, New Orleans.
Yeah, New Orleans is also the worldwide headquarters for a very bizarre and creepy satanic organization. I'm just saying, I think the two things are probably not that separated.
A lot of voodoo going on there.
A lot of voodoo. Hey, get the Haitians in there. We got some
Creole. Yeah. I think there are a good bit of them. I think I misunderstood what we were doing on this podcast tonight. You told me it was called Vampires, and I was under the impression we were doing a Twilight fan podcast.
Is that why you dressed like a werewolf?
Yeah, I had a whole fucking speech prepared about why Alice was my favorite Cullen. I don't. What's
nice.
going on?
I ended, and now you mentioned that, yeah. I mean, I didn't realize in the mid 2000s there was that resurgence of the vampire stuff with the Twilights. All of a sudden, I see everyone dressing up like vampires. Everyone like, why is everyone dressing up like vampires all of a sudden?
But I think that is, I don't know that it was necessarily a resurgence. It was specifically that series.
People there was that. There was an HBO series, I believe, right? Like
Pure Blood, True Blood.
Pure Blood. There we go.
Something like that.
I was going to call it Bitten, but I was like, that's not right.
Yeah, no, you're right. There was a movie or something.
Resurgence, yeah. I started seeing vampires everywhere again. Fucking vampires, man. But yeah,
vampires.
So I'm in Murray, Kentucky back in 1998, March of 98, and sure as shit, I've never heard hide nor hair of these murders that just, they all just had gotten convicted by that point. They tore down the headquarters of the vampire headquarters down there. Well, the Bible Belt Christians down there did not take kindly to the vampire cult. I can tell you that much. But yeah, Blade had just come out. I guess maybe it was March of 99, I guess. Yeah. March 99 now I think about it. Because Blade had just come out on VHS. And I just learned about these vampire cult that day. I'm watching Blade that night, you know what I mean? And my dude's dad, who were down there visiting his dad.
Fantastic opening scene. Just
Blade?
throwing that out there. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, that original Blade movie, I think it still holds up. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. But the opening scene is just fucking fantastic when that dude rolls in there with Tracy Lord and thinks he's going to get his little pee-pee wet or whatever. And then all of a sudden it just starts raining blood on everybody. That
starts popping off.
Yeah, hell yeah.
I think Wesley Snipes is coming back to play that role again.
I was under the impression he was not. But I don't know.
He just appeared in the recent Deadpool movie as Blade.
Really? I haven't seen that yet.
I haven't either. I just saw some pictures of him dressed as Blade and I standing next to Deadpool. So
I think he should. Yeah, I think he should be. But I was under the impression he was not.
Yeah. I mean, I'd watch it. I'd probably watch it. Even though he used that Blade money to fund a weird ancient Egyptian mound sex cult out of Georgia, but that's a different story altogether.
Which might have been fine if he'd have paid taxes on it.
It might have been,
but he did not. So then he.
But yeah, so it's March of '99. I just smoked a bunch of pot with my dude and his dad down in Murray, Kentucky. Just met dude's dad, because he lived with his mom in Ohio, And my dude had smoked so much he's passed out by the end of the film. But the movie ends, no one said anything. We're all just entranced from this, in a vampire glamour from this film, right?
Yep.
And the old dude looks over to me, goes, he's freaked the fuck out too at the end of this movie. He's just, the look on his face looked like he's seen a ghost or an actual vampire. And he just looks at me and goes, vampires, man. Fucking vampires. And I was like, you ain't kidding, dude. You ain't kidding. Because I was already freaked out from the actual vampire cult earlier that day that I learned about, let alone this, it was a decent, I enjoyed the movie, but I wasn't scared. This dude was frightened, out of control. He was out of control scared. Like,
some people handle their weed a little different than other people.
Yeah. So yeah, we got a few guests in here now. We got Nick and Lisa from the Occult Rejects, and we got Dr. Inferno. Nick, Lisa, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
What up?
How's it going?
Doing well.
What's happening?
Dr. Inferno, welcome to the show.
Why does Dr. Inferno look like a vagina?
I don't think so. I think that's like it's not supposed to. It's not supposed to.
I guess just because it's small, I can't see the detail.
Yeah, it's small. Yeah.
Looks
not
like
real life though.
Goddamn dark pussy like my ex-wife over there.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Well, damn, that's too much details.
So we're just getting the table set here for vampire cult discussion. I was saying, telling Dan here, Dr. Inferno, that you have an extensive knowledge in the history of these Kentucky vampire cults as a native Kentuckian yourself, but also of the role-playing games.
Not especially, but they are interesting. My theory about Vampire the Last Masquerade and a lot of the tabletop games, I think, is a lot of them, and this is going to sound far out, is I think a lot of them are just government ops for like training people for warfare and maybe psychological conditioning. That's my theory about a lot of tabletop games, including D&D all the way to Vampire the Masquerade to even Magic the Gathering stuff. So basically they're articulating people for a certain kind of tactics, and they're like kind of like they're doing with video games right now for a lot of the younger generation now. Now they have a bit more augmented reality, so they're like exploiting a lot of that for the future. You could say a lot of Zoomers are like so used to augmented reality from the internet, and not to mention iPad babies too. That's like almost an extension of their reality. So I think they're trained. A lot of this stuff is really just psyops to train people. That's at least my theory. It's far out there, but I think there's a lot of evidence. Because the vampires, let me just say this before we move on to, I don't mean to.
Do you think that's what happened to Rod Farrell then? Do you think this was some sort of...
Well, not especially Rod Farrell, but it was kind of used as a device to seek out like other people to prime them for certain personality types. Because I guarantee you a lot of these
before Discord.
Games, before Discord, of course.
Yeah. Discord before Discord, right? This is what Discord
pretty much.
Today, right?
Yeah. Tabletop games were kind of like the means to prime out highly intelligent kids that might be into fantasy that might also serve for like these kind of think takes later on. As far out as that shit is, I really think nothing is developed in America without any kind of military apparatchik.
As it should be.
You know what I thought was weird? I mean, it literally could just be maybe just a situation, but like, I mentioned before on my own show, I did time in federal prison, and I was surrounded by a lot of chomos, pedophiles. It was Fort Dix, and there was so many there, you couldn't even check them into the shoe because the shoe wasn't big enough. So, I mean, you literally...
They didn't just stab them?
Well, if you did that's the whole thing. It's like when the shoe only holds 184 people, and you got like 500 of them. Like, what the hell are you going to do about it?
Were they all there into sci-fi and stuff? That does seem to be.
They all play D&D and Magic the Gathering.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
It's weird.
That's what was the craziest thing, is that these dudes were even allowed to have tables to take up for that. I was just like, am I in the Twilight Zone? This is prison?
Yeah. So you mean you're not saying they played before they got in. You're saying they played while they were in.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Comic books. They all had comic books. It was like, like obviously you're still 10 years old.
There seems to be a gateway to a lot of those types from that sci-fi and tabletop games for some weird reason.
I did find that weird. I was like, all of them like Dungeons and Dragons. I was like, I haven't heard of that. Like, real crazy story. You could actually look it up in the news. The last time I heard of Dungeons and Dragons, a kid who lived at the corner of my block when I was growing up killed his family because it told him to.
Yeah, it's like weird.
And I was like, I haven't heard of Dungeons and Dragons in a while. I was like, all these fucking Dungeons and
I feel like that was brought up in the Satanic Panic, kind of got engulfed in the Satanic Panic stuff, but I do think that Dungeons and Dragons was actually created by a Satanist. Like, I don't.
That's why I think it's a psychological device.
Yeah.
That's probably being utilized by a lot of people. It's good for programming. I'll say that. You immerse yourself into kind of a different world, and you split reality, kind of like what the internet's doing with ARGs and other interfaces. So it's
that's a good point.
Definitely
a good point. It does split the reality, though. That's a really good point about that.
Now, I want to say something. I want to say something that's very interesting about the vampire, and I want to mention a particular guy by the name of Edward Lansdale, which I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with. Edward Lansdale.
I know Nick is.
Yeah, I'm sure he is. Edward Lansdale. A lot of people undervalue the occult, and they think the occult is only used as kind of a magical device or some kind of device for fantasy. But a lot of times it has a certain transformative property within it to where it can like transform people's reality. And I think the intelligence, like the CIA and maybe even military, like the naval intelligence, knew this, and they devised a type of plan. We see this like in the Philippines when they were fighting these sort of like communist guerrillas in the Philippines.
The Husks.
They were like they were actually utilizing the local folklore in that region, known as the Ashwang, which are vampiric type entities that the Filipinos, that particular Filipino tribe, believed in, and they were using this like as a device, as I mentioned previously.
A very effective one at that.
Yeah, they hung them upside down and like blood.
Yeah, they hung them upside down and poked holes in them and like convinced the other tribes that they were like draining them of blood. And what I'm saying is this motif doesn't just come up within like this particular vampire clan. It also goes all the way back to a serial killer by the name of Richard Chase. Now, what's interesting about
Chase? Is that you said?
Richard Chase, yeah, Richard Chase, the Sacramento vampire. Now, what's interesting about him is he's not only into vampires, but he's also into like cattle mutilation. All of these trifectas of like conspiracy staples and ufology staples. And he believes that there's like Nazis and UFOs that's following around. There's cattle mutilation. They caught him in a car, actually, with sucking the blood of a cow. He had a cow in the back of his car, and he was just sucking his blood. And this guy believed also that if he didn't consume blood, his body parts would fall off. It was the degenerative type of disease he thought he had. So he had to just keep consuming blood over and over again. Now, this guy was diagnosed as schizophrenic. Most likely he probably was, but it's kind of interesting that he believed a lot of the staples that you see, like with a lot of abduction cases, a lot of the ufology stuff. It seems to be the trifecta, but Richard Chase is an interesting case when it comes to like the whole vampiric lore and serial killers. And this guy was sloppy too. I guess they didn't have forensics back then. This guy was sloppy. He just went from killing people, actually started just putting birds and like other animals in a blender and just consuming it. It's wild.
Yeah, I've never heard of this guy. It sounds pretty wild.
Yeah, he believed like psychic vampires were following him in UFOs, and they were draining his vitality. And that's another thing that people don't know is there's multiple types of vampires. It's not just the necro vampires that are like they're undead, but there's like psychic vampires too, which actually started. I mean, it's there's like a show called What We Do in the Dark, which plays upon that whole like narrative about psychic.
That's a good show. That's a funny.
It is a good show. It is a good show. Like this like particular psychic vampire that's there. He just he's like always draining the other people's like energy and like just draining them of all their essence, and like it's a common like trope in that show about.
He's a regular dude though, right? The psychic vampire, he's
like a regular
regular dude.
Another thing is interesting is that not every like there are like certain like movies that play with the whole vampire trope. It's not just it's not just the typical vampires. It's like there's like Near Dark, which shows like typically when you see vampires, they're like these regal aristocrats, these old school like monarchs that tried to like extend their life and their energy force. But you see also like there's these dirty vampires like in Near Dark. Near Dark has like these really, really dirty, ragged vampires that are supposedly Confederate soldiers and generals that were part of the probably the bushwhackers back in during the Confederacy, and
Sure.
they're like barely surviving. They're like living a marginal lifestyle in RVs and kind
Sounds
of on
like
the
something out of a
outskirts.
trauma film.
Pretty well, it's a little bit more polished than a trauma film, but yeah, they're not your sophisticated
redneck vampires instead of redneck zombies.
Vampires. Yeah, they are just like redneck zombies. I love redneck zombies.
Oh, redneck zombies is great.
That's an awesome film. Moonshine that turns people into zombies.
Yeah.
It's an awesome film.
Well,
that show True Blood is pretty much redneck vampires.
Is
yeah,
it really?
It is, but
that show.
Yeah, it somewhat is. It somewhat is.
It was more swamp instead of redneck, but it was more swamp.
Yeah,
but they still present like the vampire as like the regal aristocrat type of, instead of like, I like Near Dark the best because they're dirty, realistic vampires. I really hate the whole sissified kind of homoerotic stuff like Twilight and some of the other stuff. I love
Twilight.
The dirty. I love the dirty vampires, the ugly vampires, the ones that are not romantic. That's personally what I like. I mean, I guess people differ in their opinion.
Doc, did you see that show we were talking about earlier?
What, Vampire: The Last Masquerade? Yeah. I just watched it recently, as a matter of fact.
What'd you think about that?
I thought it was actually pretty good, but it's like, I think it was produced by Aaron Spelling, and
I do too.
One of those like 90210 type, soap opera stuff. It wasn't bad. I mean, I don't like Aaron Spelling stuff. I mean, obviously, I'm not a woman, but I don't think it was, I don't think it was bad for like what the content was considering.
But it had different kind of types of vampires.
I like the fact it had Nosferatu as like the head clan. That was kind of cool in a nod.
Yeah, and they were kind of, they were less human than the others.
Yeah, I like that too.
They're kind of some of those dirty, like you were talking about.
Yeah, I like that, but they were still kind of polished up. But I like that they function kind of like mafioso type clans. That was kind of cool. Which I find if there's going to be any kind of vampire in the modern day world, and not just the LARPy types. I mean, even Rod Farrell and some of these people were like LARPy types. If they're like really are people, and believe it or not, here's something interesting. I don't know if you touched upon this, JJ. And I'm sorry to like be all over the place, but
no, you're fine, man. We're just chatting vampires at the moment. So
there was a case about Susan Walsh, who was like an underground journalist. She actually, 1996. This is back at the height of the vampire lore. Like vampires have kind of fallen off a little bit. Nobody's particularly interested in vampires much anymore, except for some French neo-Nazis. Believe it or not, that's another story. But
I would argue Satanists are also interested in vampires, but we can get into
that. What's funny is that there's overlap between the Satanists and the neo-Nazis. That's what's funny is that I'm not kidding about that either.
That's who comprises vampires, overlap. Satanists and neo-Nazis?
Satanists and neo-Nazis, pretty much. I
mean,
there's like, not to get off topic with Susan, but let me go back to Susan Walsh before I cover that. Neo-Nazis, Satanists, oh my. But Susan Walsh is, like this woman, she disappeared back in 1996, around July 1996, and they didn't know her whereabouts. But she was like she was uncovering a lot of these secret kind of vampire dens that existed in like these subcultures in New York City. She was an up and coming journalist, but she also had connections to the Russian mafia, which some people think it might not have been the vampires itself, but it might have been also Russian mafia that was involved with her. But she disappeared. And some people say it was like this guy named Kristen, this vampire guy named Kristen. Now, this was in the Village in New York City. Now, this is not a place that's alien to like occult activity or like these weird subcultures, because there was a Hare Krishna guy back in the day during the Satanic Panic in the 1980s that was killing people, murking people. But this particular case is like mysterious, like no one knows where she just vanished without a trace. So I think if there's any solid evidence that vampires actually existed as a subculture and they were like killing people or possibly sanctioned by, I would say occult, subcultures, it would probably be Susan Walsh out of all the people. And I'm surprised that you don't know about that, JJ.
No,
clamored by.
Is anybody else like familiar with that case? Like, I just want to ask that. I don't want to just hog the panel. Is like anybody else?
No. Well, here, let me jump in there, Doc, because I think that's a good point. I think I actually have heard about that case, and it's actually where I was going to start off on our show this evening. But because it's an intersection between an author who I think wrote about that case, and she went undercover in the vampire culture.
That was her.
Well, I think this is a different author.
Okay.
Yeah. Catherine Ramsland, who was Brian Koberger's.
Okay, that's interesting.
Professor.
She's a that's interesting about her. She's like an FBI profiler that's really into true crime. And what's interesting about her,
she's a lot of things, but honest or objective is I don't think are any of the things that she qualifies for.
I think she's like most true crime kind of FBI profilers. A lot of them sensationalize their stuff and cover up the tracks. The more I read into like the true crime stuff, the more I'm inclined to believe they're covering up their tracks. A lot of these profilers are just covering it up because when I read bits and pieces, including her work, they always put these bits and pieces that is not ever disclosed upon true crime documentaries. There's always some extra stuff that's like Dave McGowan stuff. Like, for instance, Stephen Singulaire is another person that is infamous for this. So, yes, I'm familiar with Kathleen Ramsland. She talked about Susan Walsh. She was actually involved in the Susan Walsh case. That's where I learned about Susan Walsh is from Catherine Ramsland. So I think she's being disingenuous often in her writings. She's trying to like cover the tracks for a lot of the FBI. The FBI, I think, lies about serial killers and a lot of the occult nature of crime. I think they just lie about it and just sweep it under the rug because there's nothing to see here, guys. Yeah, pretty much.
Everything, though.
I think they especially do that with the occult, though, because they like.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like, okay, we're not supposed to believe in occult murders here, but there's like evidence that there's these different occult communities like that's leaked into the pages of these true crime novels and these true crime like profiles, and it's like I'm going to press X to doubt. I'm going to doubt a lot of their the veracity of a lot of their claims because they get very close, but they never disclose more. Makes you wonder what's in the vault. John Douglas is another person that's especially infamous for that. I've never trusted John Douglas, or I don't trust Catherine Ramsland either. I think she knows a little bit too much.
She wrote a book with the BTK, kind of writing off all of the occult nature of that situation.
Well, have you read her book on the vampires? Have you read her book on the vampires? And
no, I have not, and I probably won't if I'm being honest.
You should actually. You should. There's a lot of juicy information in there because she talks about this underground. This guy named Father Sebastian. He's based out of L.A. He actually is like interviewed a lot when it comes to like the vampires, and he knew about the Susan Walsh case. At least he said in the documentary, he said, well, a lot of my elders know about Susan Walsh and she's still alive. Now he could just be bullshitting and grifting and conning a lot of people that are not familiar with the subculture. But apparently the subculture was very prominent back in 1996, so prominent that they had hotlines where people could call in and secret codes for people could call in. So it kind of functioned like a Masonic lodge. Now, this is going to circle back to Rod Farrell. You know about Rod Farrell's father, right? Or his grandfather, sorry. His grandfather.
Yeah, I was going to say his grandfather was a cult member in, I think, something called the Black Shadow.
Yeah, something like the Black Shadow. Now,
I have it later in our slides. Why don't you hold those thoughts on Rod Farrell
sorry,
and
go ahead.
That stuff? No worries.
Anyway.
Nick and Lisa, are you familiar with the Netflix series that just got canceled? The Gem City Vampires?
Not at all. No.
It's about a So we were kind of briefly in our intro kind of mentioning this situation because Dan and I both have spent a lot of time in and around Dayton. Never really met any vampires, and whenever these vampire stories get out and the murders surrounding them, the details that is, as we mentioned with Rod Farrell and the vampire clan out of Kentucky. They didn't get very vampire-y when they murdered folks, and neither did they here in Dayton. And I think what's interesting is the satanic elements of it, right? There's these vampire contingents of these satanic organizations, and that's something we've talked about quite a bit over there on the Occult Rejects, is these satanic organizations. And this Netflix documentary revolved around a murder that happened in Dayton back in the 90s at a electronic dance music club, industrial rock club. And some of the music. So this was a pretty focal place for cult activity, apparently in Dayton in the 90s, and that's apparently what the documentary was about. And some fellow allegedly got his head lopped off in a satanic ceremony there by a bunch of vampires. And on its face, it sounds crazy because that's not a vampiric way to kill someone, but I would argue that it comports with the satanic elements of the situation.
It kind of is.
With the bloodletting.
No, the chopping off the head is kind of also a device that's used by like occultic killings because the power is like in the head and considered to be tied to the soul. Like the Celts and the Germanic Norse believed that. So I can definitely see that. which a lot of like this piggybacks off that.
I could see certainly with the bloodletting aspects of it, because there certainly is a lot of blood exchange amongst these quote-unquote.
Well, that's how you kill a vampire, though. Is lopping on its head. That's part of the lore.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They got to drive a stake through his heart. I've been doing the wrong things to try to kill vampires all these years.
You can do both. I mean, you can do both, but lopping off the head will kill pretty much, immobilize a vampire, depending on what lore you believe. There's like so much like lore when it comes to vampires.
Yeah, so but to this Dayton scenario, Netflix, I think, in my opinion, they produce a lot of crap. A lot of their documentary nonsense, a lot of lies and whatnot. It just boggles my mind. Dan's predominant theory is that Netflix got glamoured by these vampires and canceled the documentary. But I don't know. I'd like to hear maybe some of your all's thoughts on why you think maybe Netflix would cancel something like this. Seems like given the nature of pop culture, it seems like it would be successful, to me at least.
I think that it worked probably in contrast to what they are trying to do by bringing vampires to the topic, or to the zeitgeist, rather. I think there's this new... Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
It sounds a little bit echo on my
Crystal.
part. So there is a lot of talk about this parabiosis, or having... older people pay for young blood, right? To kind of rejuvenate or make themselves feel youthful or what have you. And so I do know that when we've looked at certain people, name escapes me, but there have been certain upper echelon people that keep.
Like Abramovich?
No, I've not. Yeah, I've never come across like an actual statement that said, yes, this person lives with this person and they basically donate blood to them on a regular basis.
I think
Peter
Thiel's got a blood boy, doesn't he?
Yes.
His boyfriend actually contributes the blood to him.
Is that the one that jumped off the building, or is that a different boyfriend?
I think it's a new one. The one he married in Austria.
Okay.
The one he's been married to has been, but I think he keeps different ones, different companies.
He's got a younger blood boy.
Yeah.
Blood batteries.
No, I think so. And then I believe that the startup companies that have popped up, especially in big tech seems to fund a lot of these companies. One of them was called Ambrosia, to where they were seeking out, candidates of a certain blood type with certain genetic markers and what have you. And then they would donate the blood, and the blood would then be sold to recipients that wanted the blood for aesthetic purposes, right? You do have it in the beauty industry. It's called vampire facial, to where it's your own blood. So they say, right? It's your own blood, and they go ahead and they spin it down and they pull out the effective peptides that they want to utilize, and then you go in through, and I think they do a little bit of needling onto the face to kind of stimulate like an insult or like collagen production, and then they put the blood over your face, and then it's supposed to rejuvenate and kind of bring it back to its youthful state, or something or another. But there
like
is
the PRP stuff, like the blood platelets.
Yes, exactly. But just on the surface after the needling. But there's so much surrounding a lot of blood in terms of youth donating to older, richer recipients. And I think that with Netflix canceling, I think if you were to put something out like that, it kind of gives maybe a more negative connotation. Whereas I believe that what they want to do is to kind of make it a household name, make it less taboo, bring it down from the whole shock factor. That's what I think. I think that's why it was counterintuitive to what the zeitgeist is trying to push.
If I were to summarize what she just said, it would basically be that the vampires have stepped in and stopped Netflix from. That's what I heard. That's what I heard her say.
Something like that. You said it so much better.
They got glamour.
They had a bigger lobby than Israel.
Yeah. Well, they're older, right?
Vampire lobby.
Yeah.
Speaking of Israel, you're talking about all vampires.
Israel,
How about Jesus Christ? That dude was clearly a vampire.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I mean, somebody fucked his mom and then glamored her into thinking that she banged God. Out pops Jesus Christ.
Are you calling Yahweh a bloodletter?
Yeah, but see, they tried to kill the guy. They found out he was a vampire and tried to kill him, but they didn't lop his head off. They didn't stake him. Lo and behold, 3 days later, out pops Jesus Christ back doing some vampire shit.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because there is a vampire in the Bible, I believe. I believe Adam's first wife, Lilith, is often considered a vampire.
Absolutely, yeah.
And she's venerated as like the head goddess of some of these vampire cults, which I think is interesting when you start looking at the satanic elements of some of these activities. Specifically, Nick, were you aware of the? This is something I came across in my vampire study, not that long ago, probably last year sometime.
I mean, her name literally is a Mesopotamian word for demon.
Lilith, right? Yeah, but
Lilith
she's often described as a vampire. Michael Aquino's wife was named Lilith, and they actually started a order of the vampire, and it's the second oldest order in the Temple of Set. And I think those two things are not unrelated, the Lilith aspects and the the vampiric order within the satanic organization of the Temple of Set. Nick, were you familiar with any of these vampire stuff within these satanic organizations and any of your occult research?
No, I mean,
I wasn't either. I mean,
it sounds silly to me. You know what I'm saying? So I probably really never entertained some of it. You know what I'm saying? To be honest,
a lot of vampires.
To me, see the whole thing, even with vampirism, I see it in a totally different aspect when it comes to occultism. So, not even the same way that you would even be looking at it. So, no, I really haven't.
We're talking like a psychic type vampire?
Unfortunately, I haven't come across any of that stuff in my experiences.
Sounds like they got to him.
How do you mean it got to me?
No, but I think Nick, that we've had discussions, you and I, about blood and how it's the vitality of life and how it is revered among secret teachings. It's revered in a lot of religions, that Abrahamic religions. If you think about Star Wars, what was the main driver is the midichlorians, and the midichlorians are found where? In the bloodline.
Bloodstream,
yeah. So everything goes back to the blood. The blood is life. It is, once your blood stops circulating, you don't have movement of transport anything to the rest of the body. You could, I guess, look at it like rivers or oceans on a planet. Once it all stops, life stops. So I think blood is a sacred medium to anybody and anything, really.
Yeah. Kind of like the whole stem cell thing too. I mean, it's basically the same principle.
Well, stem cells comes from bone marrow. And so blood originates from bone marrow as well. So all of your, I guess you could say, totipotent cells or pluripotent cells, to cells that basically can make anything in your body. They have the map or the blueprint to make any cell in your body come or reside within the bone marrow itself. And most of your blood cell, not most, all of your blood cells come from bone marrow. And so that you could consider them, kind of the source. And so you usually make blood turnovers within 2 to 4 weeks or something like that. And so you have blood freshly coming from bone marrow. And so you could say that stem cells are, in there, or they have that actual potency, hence the PRP, right? The plasma-rich platelets.
Sure.
So you have that as well.
I was kind of just getting at the idea that you want to get them from like babies, young blood, young stem cells.
Mm-hmm. Those are the most potent. Yes, those are the most potent because they have yet to differentiate. And so they basically can turn into anything you want them to. And that's kind of the, I believe, the actual technology with cloning. And so that they will, take an egg, a fertilized egg, and it has been activated. And then they will remove the inside, the DNA that's already currently in there, and insert the DNA of selection or of choice of whatever they want, and then let that grow. So you're basically housing new DNA. But because it's more of closely related to conception and stem cells, everything is on. you could basically create anything you want, and hence the technology behind stem cells. So
cloning presents a whole other method of procreation for vampires. I mean, typically at this point, it's just, the passing of the blood back and forth. Now they can clone. You're blowing my mind here.
I mean, if I was a vampire, I'd want to go work at one of these biomedical firms, right? You know what I mean? Like, I think that's probably a trope in some Hollywood film where the vampire works at the blood bank. But I mean, that sounds reasonable. That's where I want to go work if I was a vampire.
Well, and I believe that there are some speculative practices in terms of like with blood donations, because you have an enormous amount of people donating blood. Anytime there's a natural disaster, regardless of what type of disaster it is, the first thing they start asking for is donate blood. And I believe they do get a lot of blood. And some people will say, no, there's a blood shortage. But yet you see people showing up to donate blood all the time.
Sure.
Now, is it because they are looking for a specific type? Absolutely. Have they filtered some of the stuff out, the particulates or whatever that they find, I don't know, whatever in it, and they can't use it? Maybe. I don't know. But what happens to that blood? Because that blood doesn't last infinitum, right? It only is going to be good for a certain amount of time. And so what are they doing? Dumping it all? Or are they selling it? I mean, I don't know.
Or maybe it's a black market. There are lots of cults that do seem to drink blood.
I do think
I actually just wanted to bring this up. What you just said, drink blood. The one thing I find interesting, though, that when it comes to blood, now you could just be some like edgelord, psycho, and nothing makes sense to you, and you're like thinking that you're drinking people's blood. But like, if these people have a specific reason to have blood, they're not drinking it, because all you're going to do is get iron. You have to mainline the blood to get any benefits from it. So these people aren't drinking blood like vampires if they're using blood for a specific reason. To go back into them, you get no benefits drinking. So they have to be shooting it into their veins.
That's an excellent point, Nick. Yes, drinking blood, you're going to neutralize most of it in your stomach acids, and so all you're going to have is leftover iron, and then you run the risk of getting hyperferrid or something. I can't remember what the disease is.
So what you're saying is it's more of like a mystical belief system that drinking it does anything then.
Well, I mean, I think it has some health benefits.
Makes it worse. It makes it sound even look creepier too.
I think there is some benefits, but it's not what they think it is. Again, don't come at me or anything like that. But mainlining would be the best way to receive the benefits. Yeah.
Again, they could just be like people who don't even realize what they're doing and just they're not getting anything.
Well, that's true too. But it seems like at least from my experiences, and I'll start off here with sharing a couple of these.
Goose skulls and unsolved mysteries.
Yeah, so I've encountered a couple of vampire cults over my lifetime, and both occurrences, these vampire cults seem to drink blood. Right, that seems to be the focus of their activities. Yep. The first one I learned about in this book. As a teenager, Green Mountain Ghost Schools and Unsolved Mysteries. And, I didn't learn about it, but this is where it's documented. I'm sorry. This is where it's documented. I was 11 years old, and I used to spend a lot of time in Vermont as a child every summer growing up. And one instance there when I was 11, back in 92, there was an instance where there was a group of teenagers sitting on Burlington, Vermont's City Hall steps, drinking each other's blood. And then the older vampire, they all identified as vampires. The 500 or 600-year-old vampire, he decided that he would just pop out a gun and then start shooting everybody, shooting it up in the air. I'm sorry. So once again, not really vampire-like activities, but this vampire cult certainly was into drinking each other's blood, and it was documented in the news at the time, and again captured in this guy's book, but. I challenge anyone to locate the actual news reports of this. But as it reads here, during 1992, the strangest news story broadcast by WCAX TV's Channel 3 was about vampirism in Burlington City Hall Park. Apparently, a gaggle of which I'm not sure if that's the proper vampire terminology. I'd rather go with a murder of black-clad youngsters. Were actually drinking each other's blood right outside Mayor Clavel's office. The slashing and sipping was reportedly performed under the direction of a 600-year-old vampire. And the police, it goes on to say the police didn't intervene, and that is until the 600-year-old vampire pulled out a gun and started shooting in the air.
Listen, it might sound like it's not vampiric activity, but vampires have to get bored too. Who doesn't like shooting guns in the air? What's we talking about here?
And what you're inferring then is maybe this guy glamored everybody, and that's how he disappeared.
Maybe he did.
He was actually a 600-year-old vampire, crazy asshole.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he just likes shooting guns in the air, you know?
Right. So yeah, they were drinking blood, and then on to the next instance here of vampire stuff that I've encountered in my life, at least, and that the story in tonight's title, "Vampires, Man, Fucking Vampires," was after watching the film Blade for the first time back. I was in Murray, Kentucky. Just learned about the vampire cult of Rod Farrell from a man who got freaked out by the movie Blade, and then was quoted as saying, "Vampires, man, fucking vampires." Well, that man was the former bassist for Bobby Mackey's, which he played in the house band at Bobby Mackey's Honky Tonk, which is allegedly the most haunted nightclub in America. Now, the reason why it's haunted is because there was a satanic ritual sacrifice that occurred there, where this woman's head got lopped off and the blood drained. And a very similar style murder, according to the details, as the same fellow there in Dayton. It was a nightclub, got murdered in the basement, allegedly, head lopped off, blood drained down into some lower collective kind of piping system that they had for these kind of ritual events. Very bizarre stuff. I just think it's interesting that, the time I encountered this vampire cult in Kentucky, the guy who's telling, one of the guys that's telling me about it is, connected to this other satanic situation here, Bobby Mackey's. But
if I may interject here, JJ,
yeah, go ahead.
What year was this? What year was this approximately?
The murder of Pearl Bryant?
Yeah, around this time period when this Ohio vampire cult, because it sounds like it was latter
2023.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Wow. No, well, the actual murder for the vampire cult was in 1994.
Okay, yeah, that's around contemporary when there was a lot of vampiric kind of clan activity.
Oh yeah, I mean the 90s were rampant with vampire stuff.
I was just wondering about the time period.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Here we go. This is the victim of the Dayton situation right here. Whoops. Did that wrong. Here we go. Let's try that. There we go. Yeah, George Philip Gall. Yeah, last seen October 13th, 1994. I believe he was declared dead approximately 9 months later by his family. Well, at least his family did. I don't think he's officially dead, but like his family was like, "Oh, well, this guy's clearly been murdered." They hired private detectives. They had undercover cops and were on the scene at this nightclub. So there was seemed to be from my assessment of the situation, it seemed like at the time folks knew what had occurred, and then ever since then it's just been trying to cover up mode ever since then. But
he's not officially dead. I think we know why. I think we know why.
But so the vampire cult in Kentucky was, this erupted out of that 90s atmosphere. This is the Murray Vampire Clan murders happened 20 years ago. This was back in 2016. So yeah, it was happened in November of 1996. Yeah, it was the victims of this crime, I think, are just as interesting as the crimes myself. The victim of the crime was one of the girl in the cult's fathers. He happened to be the son of Billy Graham's attorney, the evangelical preacher dude. So I just think that's a very odd circumstance given, you can look at it a couple different ways, like Satan versus Jesus. I don't know if you know what I mean, like with the Billy Graham scene versus the Satanists or the vampire folks here. But I just think it's interesting more from a parapolitical standpoint. Like,
what's also interesting is that simultaneously, like, there was a cult in one part of Western Kentucky, and then there was a cult somewhere in like Pikeville, Kentucky. So there was like on the two opposite ends of like Kentucky, there was these cults. It's almost like it was connected through some kind of network, even because they are very similar.
I think there is something to be said there.
Was it like a Hatfield McCoy thing? Were they warring clans?
Yeah, I would hope so.
I mean, it's Kentucky. Fuck
It
else
is
you gonna
Kentucky.
do?
Yeah. I mean, yeah,
You
true.
got to feud properly in Kentucky.
Hey, believe it or not, Kentucky's pretty active and it's pretty radioactive. Believe it or not, surprisingly. Literally.
So Rod Farrell here was the leader, the quote unquote leader of the vampire clan out of Murray. He was the foster child of my dude's uncle's family. My dude's uncle went to Murray, Kentucky to visit his family on our spring break in high school. You know,
Man,
most
he's
folks
not
go to the
aged-
beach.
He's not aged well, man. So much for his.
Well, I mean, he's in prison.
Yeah, motherfucker's been in prison for
life sentence.
25 years.
Yeah, but a vampire would stay youthful no matter what.
Right.
Yeah, getting a life sentence as a vampire, goddamn worst nightmare. Jesus Christ, that son of a
Can you
bitch going to
imagine?
spend
He's
the
literally
next
never getting
900 years in that fucking prison.
I don't think the
I
American
wonder how much-
taxpayer can pay all that money
Yeah, that's
for a
that's
vampire.
I mean, but
Yeah.
you do have a lot of like fresh.
They got him
supply
on
of
Social
blood.
Security over there because they're
Yeah,
gonna
wildly
give him off benefits or
irresponsible.
something.
kill that fucking thing.
Right.
Lop off his head, stick a vampire or stick a
Right.
stake in his heart, do some shit. This is draining our tax dollars.
Or maybe
Well,
you
put
could
him
use
in a
him for
private
the-
prison, so it costs even more too.
There you go.
Maybe you could send him
So-
where the Dugars are in prison.
The Dugars.
The Dugars.
The Duggars.
So yeah, so this guy was the leader, but he was born into it, right? So like this was his mother,
Yeah.
and she even comments how she was actually busted right here. It says right here, former prostitute and cult member who tried to solicit a 14-year-old boy
Yeah,
for
they-
sex
they
in
were
a vampire
burning,
initiation, right?
something interesting about them. They were like burning pentagrams in apartments. That was actually what they were doing, and she was teaching him all about this kind of stuff back in his childhood.
Right.
At least early
And
as like
apparently
10 years
she
old.
was
and
born into it.
Yeah. Which is why I think the grandfather probably had a lot to do with somehow instilling occult values into his daughter, and then by default she instilled them in Rod Farrell. But
I think
the
you're
grandfather
right. I
also
think you're
was
right.
probably, unfortunately, the grandfather also was inappropriate with her, and she was probably inappropriate with him as well. But that's another story.
Well, that's what this 1998 article out of Tampa Bay Times was about, because it's talking about how witness Colt had molested as a boy. This is according to one witness, and right here it says Farrell's grandfather Harold Gibson denied that he or his friends molested his grandson.
But he
Or
recalls it
participated in cult
every time Rod
activity.
Farrell, and I don't mean it, sorry for interrupting, but every time Rod Farrell is interviewed in some kind of documentary or whatever, he explicitly talks about occult rituals and his grandfather.
Oh yeah,
He brings it up over and over again. And he doesn't like the investigators talking. I mean, naturally, he's probably traumatized by it, but he doesn't like the investigators prying into that, as he probably something traumatic did happen to him, and something occultic happened to him as well by his grandfather.
yeah. This seems to be he's a product of some sort of multi-generational satanic organization that just happened to go vampire at one point. I have a good idea of why it went vampire, but I can't be certain for sure. But
Well, if you
Yeah,
ever
so
look
Rod-
into
Rod
I don't
Farrell
mean to-
here.
if
Oh,
you
go
ever
ahead.
look in JJ, if you ever look into like the Masonic lodges in Kentucky, you'll find some very revealing things about Freemasonry in Kentucky. I suggest sometimes you look into that, because it's not
Is
an
it-
isolated case.
Is it vampires?
It's mostly like weird Greco-Roman type, Hellenistic type worship. I don't know if it's vampiric related, but there is a lot of weird coincidences with that.
That's a very interesting angle, because you have Knights Templar kind of being the, I guess, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong. You have Knights Templar kind of moving into this Rosicrucian belief system, and then moving into this Masonic belief system. So you have that evolution kind of happening, and you kind of have it happening a lot in the Eastern European area. And you also have, isn't it true that the origins of the word vampire it's a
Yep.
Serbian Slavic?
And you also have
Oh,
Elizabeth
really?
Bathory. You also have
Mhm.
Elizabeth Bathory as well, which hasn't been mentioned, but I think she deserves a
What's she
mention
do?
because, she was killing peasant women, and she was bathing in their blood, which pretty much had the same application as I don't know what is your name, Miss? I don't want to Lisa.
It's okay.
What Lisa was talking about previously.
The vampire
about-
facials.
Yeah, the vampire facials. Well, Elizabeth Bathory is kind of the
Ah.
originator of the vampire facials, the blood facials. She
That
pretty
is
much
so
the
She
hot.
model.
pioneered it. She was pioneering back in the day. Look
Back
at
in
her.
the day, yes. Some people think that's black propaganda that was started by the Catholics and the Jesuits, but there's probably some ample evidence. Since she was like a noble woman, she could get away with anything back in those days.
Now, where did
Yeah,
this occur?
Hungary,
Oh,
around
okay.
Eastern Europe and the Baltic states. Those are places where they're especially still to this day, and like Serbia to this day. In Serbia and like Croatia, there are still like vampiric legends, and I think Romania makes an entire
Oh.
tourist industry off
Pennsylvania.
vampires.
Off Vlad the Impaler.
Yeah, Vlad the Impaler, and I don't think Elizabeth Bathory is quite the notoriety, but she was clearly influential, which is why I think she deserves a mention, because she did influence Bram Stoker and a lot of the early vampire tales. By the way, I just want to say this before we go to the next slide or whatever. Camilla was actually the first vampire story before preceding Bram Stoker's, Dracula.
What's it called?
Camilla.
Camilla.
Yeah.
Camilla Harris.
Always talking about
No,
Camilla,
Prince Charles' new wife.
Oh,
where
okay.
that's
Yeah, there's
where my
another.
head
That's
went.
interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with this story, so this predates Bram Stoker's. Huh?
Yeah, it does. Yes. And I think Elizabeth Bathory actually contributed a lot to Bram Stoker's like Dracula as well. And I want to say this also is that what's interesting about like Elizabeth Bathory as well, and she's kind of a pet project of mine because I like looking into her past, is that she also had a network of people. She actually had her own witch that was procuring a lot of these mistresses and a lot of these peasant women. She was like scouting out for her, which is a common motif and a common practice amongst, you could say, like serial killers in later times. And some of these occultic networks had these scouts that they would procure these people for these certain psychopaths and people like Elizabeth Bathory, which could be true or not be true. I don't know. Who knows?
Isn't there a name for those type of folks within vampire lore?
Ghouls.
Well, that may be it, but that's not what I was thinking of.
Ghouls getting vampire facials?
Yeah. In their face.
So the way I look at this Rod Farrell, so Rod Farrell. Oh. So yeah, Rod Farrell, I think, was born into a lot of these activities. I think it's a multi-generational kind of satanic thing, and I think that some of the victims may have been in that same sort of, far as they're part of some sort of network and they were chosen for some sort of purpose. But my interactions with the situation was the family that housed Rod Farrell at the time. So he did have a very tumultuous childhood. I remember hearing a lot about that from the family that he was living with as a foster kid when he left for these murders. So he left his foster family and drove a couple of the other vampire cult members down to Eustis, Florida, and that's where the murders occurred. And then they went from Eustis to New Orleans, where they ended up getting arrested in Baton Rouge, but they claimed they were going to New Orleans, which again, that seems to be like the vampire capital. And again, it's also the worldwide headquarters of the process.
Blame that on Anne Rice. Blame that on Anne Rice.
Is it though? I mean, again, I don't know where this vampire satanic organization stuff kind of shakes out, and there may be a long time like satanic element too.
You're probably
vampire of the egg. It's a whole situation.
Vampire of the egg. I just think it's very interesting when you look at New Orleans and some of the occult activity that goes on there, because I think it has a very Anne Rice kind of, very pop culture-y kind of aspect to it. But I think there's probably a lot more to these stories of vampires and Satanism in New Orleans than it just, especially with the vampire aspect, than just some sort of, interview with a vampire type lens on it. You know what I mean? Isn't that what she wrote, Anne Rice?
Yep. And a series of other vampire novels.
Right.
So, JJ, would you say that vampirism is satanic?
I think so.
Would you say that then they adhere to the opposing Christian beliefs?
I would say you are correct. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I don't know why I felt like they were pre-Adamic. I felt like they would transcend.
I would agree.
The Christian religious belief system.
think
The actual vampires. I think JJ is more concerned with the vampire cults.
I mean,
Gotcha.
you could even say
So
vampire.
Do
the actual,
these cults adhere to a genesis during Adamic belief systems, or do they adhere to a belief system pre-Adamic?
Well, I think if vampires are real, then yeah, they probably do are pre. But yeah, I think that from my studies, at least, it seems like there's this. It's I mean, you can call it LARPing if you want. I don't know if that's really the correct terminology for it, but like there's this subculture within Satanism, within modern day Satanism, that is vampiric in nature, and one of the ones I came across in right here in this showing the mother's connections to this cult, because again, this was often just back just real quick on this when I'm saying the satanic elements of this specific vampire clan out of Kentucky. You know, the mother's in there, her father's in there. Again, I think these are multi-generational things, and I think that from my studies into where some of this comes from within Satanism, I found this interesting interview with this fellow from the Temple of Set, who's describing the Order of the Vampire being the second oldest order in the Temple of Set. So Temple of Set, I believe, was created by Michael Aquino in 1975. And what I find interesting is in 1976, most of 1976, in fact, roughly 5.5, 6 months of 1976, Michael Aquino was at Fort Knox, Kentucky, kind of halfway in between Murray, Kentucky, Pikeville, where the other vampire activity cult was going on, and Dayton, Ohio. Those are all about equidistance from Fort Knox, Kentucky. So I'm not saying that's the origin point for a lot of this vampire cult activity. I am proposing that it's more of a modern incarnation of vampirism, you know, derivative of stuff like Michael Aquino and his Temple of Set.
If I may interject here, Lisa was talking about pre-Adamic groups or like entities. There is like something in the Islamic lore of called the Karina. I'm probably butchering that, but it's supposedly the twin of a person that's born. And they're kind of like jinns, but they're a little different than jinns in that they are part of someone's vitality and energy. But they can also be like kind of like a psychic vampire, and they are actually an extension of Lilith. They're considered to go back to King Solomon and tied to King Solomon. And I wanted to interject that, and that if they did believe in such a thing, there are like precedent for these types of things, such as the Karina, which are born with people in Islamic countries believe in these certain particular entities. So they're kind of like jinns, but they're a little different than jinns in that they are more supernatural. They're more supernatural than jinns. Jinns are more kind of living entities that are just invisible to people, but these are kind of like have a more like vampiric nature to them, and they're attached to their host. I wouldn't say parasitic, but necessarily it's more symbiotic. No, they're more symbiotic than parasitic, because they actually do get jealous when somebody actually has they're supposedly the opposite gender of whoever is born to these particular people. So they're theoretically married to them. And
That's
you can like marry jinns in like Islamic countries and divorce them and do whatever. And but these are a little different. These are kind of like in line with vampires. But I just wanted to mention that before we move.
Well, I appreciate that. That is interesting. Yeah, I mean, there is definitely an older element. I think a lot of these cults, I think, though, seem more modern era. But that for all those could have origins in a deeper occult nature into a much longer history for sure. I thought this one might be interesting for you, Lisa. This is an instance of Satanism and vampires out of Mexico.
Okay.
The murder of a 24-year-old man in Chihuahua, Mexico. I'm sure I mispronounced that.
No, it's perfect.
That name is okay.
Yeah,
Last month
Chihuahua.
Chihuahua. Okay, fair enough. Last month is being considered by authorities as a possible satanic ritual designed to transform the victim into a vampire. So I don't know. I don't know the theology enough to understand there is some aspect of Satanism where they're trying to do rituals to turn folks into vampires.
Yeah.
But at least down there in Chihuahua, Mexico, in this
That's
instance, it may have been.
See, something like that I would even consider possibly MK Ultra stuff.
Yeah?
Yeah, because this is probably a very small percentage of why there's vampire symbolism. But then again, it really depends on like how it's being used. But my opinion, it also will show vampire symbolism, or even just fangs in general. The two fangs, you have optic nerves in the back of your eyeballs, where inside your eyeball on the front of it, there's water. In the back of your eyeball, you have blood. And you have these two things that look like fangs going into the back of your optic nerves. And that optic nerve is also where the wheels of fortune come into play, the orphanum comes into play, the rainbow bridge comes into play. That is where like the sun turns into sunlight, gets turned into electricity, and then goes into like your brain and your third eye, and you start fucking around with some crazy shit inside your head. So
this
they
could be a much deeper meaning then, is what you're saying.
Yes, they do look like fangs. So in my opinion, if you had people like some people who I think claim to be death cults are just people who jump the abyss, because technically death is a part of crossing the abyss in a sense. I would say people who could be using that symbolism are actually stating that we crossed the abyss, that we have actually had that experience. And that's actually a very big claim to make. You don't make that claim, it's true.
That's very interesting you said that, Nick, because vampires are supposed to be disconnected from the sun, because that's the whole lore, is that they're disconnected from the sun. And if most of the stuff that we've talked about, how the sun is the sun is the son of God, and your ability to connect with the supernatural realm is through being able to activate your pineal gland. And the way that you activate your pineal gland is through sunlight, morning, noon, and night. And so if you are disconnected from the sun, then you are disconnected from gnosis, so to speak, right? Because you are no longer receiving the information in packets of photons to your pineal gland and then the rest of your body for consciousness and what have you. But and so if you're talking about the optic nerve and how that you have that being kind of inserted into your brain, but yet you are disconnected, then that would make sense that they would kind of adhere to a satanic belief system, because it would be anti, I don't know, I guess like anti God, I guess, something non-God, right?
Yeah, they're kind of acting as their own gods, it sounds like. From what you're
right, exactly.
I think in this day and age, in 2024, it's a pretty well-known fact that vampires are not disconnected from the sun, but they actually just sparkle. And they are in.
Yo, they ruined it.
I don't know where you guys have been. This is a well-known fact.
Forgot about that. Sparkles.
What are we talking about here?
That's awesome. But the other thing you were talking about with the Mexican vampire cult, I am very interested and fascinated by some of the stuff that comes out of there, because I wonder how much of it is that when they report this stuff, they are reporting it from the bias or the lens of Christianity.
Yeah,
in that, is it indeed satanic? Or is it that what appears to be satanic is actually Mesoamerican pre-Columbian belief systems, and they did not adhere to an Abrahamic religion. So therefore, Satan, Lucifer, all that is not there. So
that's a valid point. That's a valid point. I think, though, in this instance, I want to say they professed to do Satan stuff.
Oh, okay. Well,
I didn't.
Stand corrected. No. That's interesting, though. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of human sacrifice going on in Mesoamerica, so that is a valid point you make there. It has nothing to do with Christianity or Satanism. But no, it says according to this, the 4 defendants took the young man by deception. They bound his hands and lied to him, telling him that he would be initiated into the sect called Sons of Baphomet. Unaware he himself would be the sacrifice, they beat him and wounded him with a glass bottle, wounded him. I can't read, apparently. Yeah, big words. Wounded him with a glass bottle, causing him to die. This, I guess, I also got confused. That sounds like a very bootleg ritual. I don't want to go out here judging folks' human sacrifice rituals. I'm just saying that sounds pretty bush league.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is you have I wouldn't say new, but you do have this murmurings of cartels coming out of Mexico calling themselves a Knights Templar.
Oh,
And
really?
if we remember some of the work that was done with the Knights Templar, they were accused of professing to receive divinations from a head that they had called Baphomet. So it's interesting, all of that.
Yeah. The
Well,
there's
let's not
also-
forget about the Matamoros killings either.
I was going to say, speaking of, there's a lot of cult stuff going on. Yeah, thank you there, Dr. Inferno. There's a lot of strange cult human sacrifice situations going on along Mexico. That Matamoros would be a good example.
So,
back
something
to
JJ, something
go
that
ahead.
I did forget to like actually get to because I really fucking went all over the place. When I said MK Ultra is because I do think it's possible to force magical effects on people and like fracture their mind. So like, who's to say they weren't actually forcing an initiation onto this kid? That was actually fuck his head up because they're pushing him to the abyss themselves. Because I do believe stuff like playing with people like that is actually something that goes on a lot more in secret societies. As crazy as that sounds, I do think that
that's a cogent point there, Nick. I appreciate that.
Do we call that animal magnetism or mesmerism? Is that something you call?
We can now if you'd like to, sure.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying it goes all the way back to Mesmer, and the Enlightenment.
No, but speaking to the MK Ultra aspect and the shattering of folks' realities and reapplication of a new framework through video games or role-playing games, I think that's some very, very, very important factors here. What's going on with some of these vampire cults? So as we discussed before, this was an article shortly after the murders there of the vampire clan out of Kentucky, blaming the entire thing on a role-playing game.
Oh, jeez.
So whether or not there's any legitimacy to that, I don't know, but it seems like, these games can be utilized for some nefarious purposes, and maybe are designed for that.
Nick, do you think that if there was an initiation and it went too far and they accidentally killed the individual, that they would just chalk it up to a random murder?
I think sometimes that's what you're getting with SFK stuff. Sometimes maybe you're just like people that unexplained, like why did these people just show up dead somewhere? Yeah, I do think that happens. Bathtub deaths, I think that's some of them. Yeah, that's definitely drownings for sure. I think drug overdoses.
This is one of the ritual sites of the. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Nick.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying with drug overdoses, you could technically give it to them, like as kind of right afterwards, and it might actually work, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly I leave it open to that ritual murders happen every day in this country, and they are described through other factors. In the instances where they're not, it's because their narrative gets lost. I've been looking at like the Delphi cases, for example, right? They initially try to write that off as just a murder. They didn't want any of the ritual aspects involved in that to be public. And it fell apart, their whole narrative. So I think there's a lot more instances where those things don't fall apart and they're able to keep the ritual narrative out of the news. I was tertiarily involved in some investigations in Cincinnati, Ohio, when I was a private detective. This is 5 years ago now, 6 years ago. There was a satanic murders, child pedophilia, pornography, all sorts of, all wrapped up in a couple cases with a couple different parties. They quickly got swept under the rug and no one knew each other, according to the official report. So I've actually seen some of the cover go on some of these ritual aspects of crimes that multi-state kidnapping of children were involved in that one. That, these things get written off and the ritual aspects are never included anymore. And they actually had, one of those dudes had like a Jeffrey Dahmer style kind of like skull, like ritual space kind of set up in his apartment. I mean, it seemed fairly in depth what was going on there. Speaking of the Son of Sam stuff we were talking about earlier today, Nick, with William Ramsey there, this site where the vampire clan used to meet in Kentucky reminds me a lot of some of the Son of Sam cult activity sites, the old kind of pump houses and stuff like that. And this was of the Tennessee Valley Authority. So this was mound country down in Kentucky, where these vampires were meeting. Very, very reminiscent, I think, of some of the Son of Sam stuff as far as the cult meeting grounds, if you will. This is another look at somewhere where they used to meet. They called it the Vampire Hotel. it was destroyed back in '98, so no longer there. But they had a couple of these. This was a building, like I said, like very reminiscent of what you see in there at the Untermeyer Park situation or the Van Cortlandt Park, with the old buildings and structures that were repurposed by cults for their cult activities and meetings.
Not much room for coffins there.
Yeah, I often wonder where some of the culture, the lore at least, that surrounds the vampires, where that really comes from. Because, like, where does something like that come from where they sleep in coffins, right? Like, how does that become an aspect of vampire lore and ingrained in everyone's mind when they think of a vampire as they sleep in a coffin?
That particular one is Bram Stoker, but I don't know if it was around before Dracula
right.
or not.
So we were talking about the Catherine Ramsland earlier, so I'm going to share just a clip here with her talking about vampires. Again, this is Brian Koberger's. I think it's funny when different disparate areas of my interests intersect. So when I discovered Catherine Ramsland, Brian Koberger's master's degree professor, was into the vampire culture. I was like, oh, well, that's interesting.
If I may interject before you do that, you say
Please.
Brian Koberger was his professor was Catherine Ramsland.
Correct.
Was he like a criminal? Was he like a criminal justice major? What exactly?
Criminal psychology.
Oh, criminal psych. Okay. I didn't know that.
She teaches criminal psychology at DeSales University in Pennsylvania.
Interesting.
She was one of his professors in his master's degree. She wasn't his only professor, but they did know each other. Unquestionably. But yeah, she went undercover, and she's specifically talking. Again, speaking of Brian Koberger, she's specifically talking to News Nation here, who does all the Koberger coverage regarding vampires.
Joined by Dr. Ramsland
Did you guys
now, and just in full disclosure,
yep.
I was at a conference with Dr. Ramsland, and we went out for a drink, and we were talking about serial killers because that is her expertise, and she started to tell me how she went underground with the vampires, which I found to be fascinating. And I did not realize, Dr. Ramsland, that you also even had like things made for the whole experience.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience. I wanted to find out what happened to this missing woman, and because I had done some writing on Van Rice there were guides to her vampire universe. I wanted to go into this world. My literary agent thought I could get in, and I did. And I went to the parties. I went to meet people alone at night in various places. I went to a number of different events to find out what this subculture was about, hopefully to find this woman. I didn't find her, but I did find out a lot about the people and why they were so attracted to this subculture.
So why are they? I mean, is it more of like kind of a role play situation, or are these actual like vampires that actually drink each other's blood?
It's all of that. It was, at the time I was in it, it was a huge subculture, thousands, tens of thousands of people. The internet, there was no social media at the time.
So I think that's interesting. She talks about how much it grew before the interwebs was even a thing, and I think that's very fascinating to me. Because
and the case she's talking about is Susan Walsh. That's the.
It is the same woman. It is the same woman, then, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I thought I wasn't certain, but yeah, I thought that was.
What's fascinating to me is that lady is clearly a vampire. What the fuck? She has a vitamin D deficiency happening there.
Big time.
She just look like a skeleton. What's happening?
You know that that Catherine Ramsland wrote a lot about Elizabeth Loftus, right?
Well, really?
Yeah.
I did not know that. I'm not too familiar with her work, I suppose.
So yeah, she kind of goes on at length about criminal psychology. In Psychology Today, she's well published. Ramsland is obviously part of her thing, but she does quote Elizabeth Loftus a lot and talks about how it supports some of the theories that she espouses.
So she's claiming, I appreciate that, Lisa. I'm not familiar with some of that work. I'll definitely have to check that out. The idea that she's espousing that there's tens of thousands of vampires, though, I just think that's kind of wild. This is wrong tab. I apologize. Give me 1 second. There was a part of this Dayton Netflix documentary that got canceled was this whole idea that there's all these vampires everywhere, but it's all really contingent upon one, I guess, vampire lobby out of Atlanta, Georgia, who claims the Atlanta Vampire Alliance, who claims they do a routine, fairly routine every 3 or 5 years. They do I guess what is essentially
the U.S. census.
A vampire census.
If I'm not mistaken, JJ, I believe that's a guy who actually wrote a book on vampires. He's connected to the Church of Satan, believe it or not.
Oh, I know, I believe it.
Know his name, but
I definitely believe it.
Probably get his name offline, but I think he's connected to the Church of Satan, and he actually had his own blood bank for a while, I believe. Which
really?
Was on
there we go. We were just talking about that too, right?
There was evidence of that, but I think it's been scrubbed off the internet. But he did write a book on the whole, his whole ordeal, and yeah, he's a big advocate of the Church of Satan in Atlanta, Georgia. If it's the same guy I'm thinking about, which he probably is.
It sounds, yeah. I mean, I imagine it's probably, if not, they know each other, right? But yeah, so out of these various studies, which they don't really provide any details of how they concluded these numbers or any of their methodology behind it, but they call themselves the Vampirism and Energy Work Research Study. And again, it gets updated every few years by this organization. Why they're doing this, they're not really clear about, but as a result of that, the claims are that the largest coven of vampires, according to these folks right here, the Atlanta Vampire Alliance, a real vampire house, according to their own website, so you have to believe it. The largest coven of vampires is in Dayton, Ohio, which again is where this very satanic murder style situation did occur in the 90s, and was the impetus behind this documentary where Kathleen Ramsland speaks about right about here.
Interesting.
So what do you know about this Dayton, Ohio situation? Because apparently there's this big Netflix documentary that's going to be coming out later this year that's already getting a lot of publicity. What have you heard about what's been going on in Ohio? Or when I guess it was decades ago, really.
It was decades ago.
Yeah.
And I would have to say, bring evidence, because the vampire community back then and even now was not about human sacrifice. It was really about transformation, a sense of belonging for marginalized people. There are crimes committed, but they're rare for that community. And they're really more about the vampire metaphor, whereas a beheading is not part of the vampire metaphor. It's more, satanic or, some other kind of ritual. So I would suggest if this guy was actually murdered by these people, and I don't know that there's evidence that he had something to do with something else besides the vampires, because that really wasn't what that community was about.
I'm just thinking about some of the things that you yourself.
So that seems pretty interesting, right? This whole her descriptions of what went on. She's immediately discounting it. She's like, it's absolutely not. There's no way the vampires are nice people, She's got this whole very pro vampire I mean, she doesn't seem to like Satanists. I mean, that is just, you can't really determine that, I don't think, from her statement, but she does quickly say, well, that's more satanic, which I would say the vampires are more satanic in general anyway. But yeah, I think I don't know. To me, her statements seem pretty much dismissive, which I find that to be telling of the whole situation.
I think we can all agree she's part of that coven.
She's definitely a vampire.
They even indoctrinated her.
Yeah, until I see a mirror in her reflection, I'm gonna believe you there, Dan.
Exactly.
She's definitely a vampire.
I think she needs a bit more blood transfusions, huh?
Or any blood at all in the nervous system.
Yeah. So the case of George Philip Gall was his name. Let's see here. I got the missing poster here. Pull that up here. He's the guy that got beheaded again. That was the determination of a undercover cop, Dayton PD, that was apparently on the scene there investigating the situation. But according to Kathleen Ramsland, yeah, I mean, speaking of her dismissive efforts, like, as you were mentioning earlier, Jason, regarding Dr. Inferno, regarding the the FBI profiling aspects of her situation, I think that kind of falls in right in line with the statement she just made on News Nation, because she's very just, oh, that could never happen. These things don't occur. Everything's totally normal. But George here was last seen getting off a bus. This is a man who just leased a new home the week prior. Him and his fiance just had a baby. He leaves the home that he shares with his fiance and his baby, gets on a bus, and goes down to the Asylum nightclub. That's where he's last seen. Never seen again. The cop that investigates it, it's the PIs that investigate it, they all claim there's this vampire subculture there and at the Asylum nightclub, and that he was beheaded in this occult ritual underneath the club, et cetera, et cetera. Which, I mean, until proven otherwise, I think that's a pretty good theory of what occurred to this man. Again, he, as I mentioned before, the idea of lobbing someone's head off and having some sort of blood pooling collective system in this basement of a club isn't a new concept. That dates back to the murder of Pearl Bryant. I think that was 1894 or whatever that was there at the Bobby Mackey, what has been recently the Bobby Mackey's nightclub in Kentucky. So, and Catherine Ramsland herself even said that sounds like more of a satanic ritual. I would agree that sounds more satanic to me as well. But what's the biggest sticking point here for me in this case is the dismissive nature of it all, right? Like, it seems like it was investigated at the time. It seems like they had some suspects, and then it seems like 20 some years later, there's nothing to see here. Look, guys, there's no vampires, there's no cult. In fact, the guy's not even dead. You can't even prove that. That's kind of their position, it seems. Yeah, we've all been glamored. That's exactly what happened, Dan.
Yeah.
We've all been glamored from the situation. Like, there's nothing to see here. You've been vampire glamored.
It's just
any thoughts regarding some of this cult murder of this fellow?
I just know that probably this time tomorrow, this episode will have been scrubbed from YouTube, and I won't remember any of you people.
Let's hope that's not the case. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It just was like Netflix airs a lot of garbage documentaries. This could easily get lost in the shuffle as a garbage documentary, even if even if there was folks trying to shut it down. I don't understand Netflix not airing this. There seems to be someone or something powerful, vampire or not vampire related, who knows, that shut it down, because this is 30 years after the guy's disappearance. What's the on its surface, what is likely the impetus for keeping this undercover? Doesn't seem to have an obvious sticking point, if you will.
By the way, JJ, I just want to reference the guy that I talked about in Atlanta. He wrote actually a book called Vampire Evolution from Myth to Modern Day. His name is Corvus Nocturnum. That's his name. And
how you spelling that?
You spell it by Corvus.
I got it. I got it. We're good.
That's the guy that I was referring to that has supposedly had the blood bank and is connected to the Church of Satan. If you put his name through the search engine, and even on YouTube, you see he's advocating for the Church of Satan and also vampirism at the same time.
Looks like he's also
interesting.
Or a consultant on A&E's Paranormal State.
Yes.
Has it become
something called Dragon Con?
Yeah, Dragon Con, LARP Fest.
This sounds familiar.
Yep, it's a LARP Fest.
He's also a reverend in the Church of Satan. Huh? That's what you're saying.
Yep.
Yeah.
JJ, with that Netflix show, is there like any bootleg versions of it or anything like that?
Oh, it's a good question, Nick. I've been looking for that. I've been trying to look into the production company, etc.
I was going to ask, is there any way have you looked into see how much it cost to make?
Yeah, it's actually very strange how little the information is about this film and its production.
Because if it was cheap as shit, I would almost take it as possible paid propaganda. You never know. Who knows?
It's certainly possible.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds shocking. You could just make up a bullshit story, or you could have made something cheap as shit, knowing that they wouldn't even put it out. But now it fucking makes it sound like something.
Like it's
it could be like
advertising, like not putting it on your Interesting.
That's certainly possible. I tend to my personal theory is I lean towards somewhere in the ballpark of what Dan's been describing of the real life vampire situation that may or may not still be going on in Dayton. When I say vampires, I really mean satanic, but the same kind of vampires we're talking about here. Vampires.
I mean, actual vampires.
Yeah, I get that.
No, you think there's like, that I'm pretty sure that, I mean, there's got to be like some twisted like family that lives in the woods that thinks drinking blood is like normal. You know what I'm saying? I'm sure there's probably
I think there's
like that out in the woods.
court. The Kentucky Vampire Clan had professionals, had adults, my understanding had attorneys involved. So we're talking about people in normal day-to-day life that were out there drinking blood in the woods in Kentucky.
Yeah, the same thing is true about
generations of just sick people.
The same is true about the underground scene in Greenwich Village as well. They were mostly professionals. They weren't low rent people.
Sure. So this Asylum nightclub, I think, is very interesting. The folks that owned it, the people the purveyors of it, the DJs and whatnot, they are all still around today, even though the club closed down nearly 20 years ago, 19 years ago. So I think from 1991 until 2005. Now, since 2000, I think in 12 or 13, they've been doing an annual reunion of this club, including the original people, not at the original location. The original location is now a troubled boys and girls runaway troubled teens situation.
How convenient.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How not suspect whatsoever. Right.
Definitely not sus.
But there's this weird culture surrounding this club still, where this guy and all these vampires, and which again was allegedly the meeting ground for this cult. There's still a very big culture of this surrounding this nightclub today. This article here shows the long closed Dayton club reemerging for one bumping night. This is back in 2019, but this apparently goes on every year. It's not a new thing, and in fact, here's some of the music you can expect to hear while attending one of these reunion shows. This one really set off some Kill Bill siren alerts in my head, especially when you get down to you got Marilyn Manson, of course. Obviously, that's one. But then you got My Thrill Kill Cult.
Yeah.
That one set off some major Kill Bill sirens in my head. Are you all familiar with this band?
Yes. Don't they go back to Genesis Peorage or something?
They do. Genesis Peorage and his buddy, his creepy buddy, I can't think of his name right now, up there in Salem, Massachusetts. Fred Gianelli. It's Fred Gianelli's band, one of Genesis Peorage's buddies.
Tapped into Nicholas Shrek too. It's often not mentioned.
Oh no, Nicholas Shrek is associated with these folks too. Yeah,
yep.
I think he's yep. So and then you have 9 Inch Nails right here next to it. Yeah. So Nick, Lisa, we've discussed a lot of these bands and this culture that goes on at this club in our discussions regarding the Smiley Face Killers. So I don't think it's not surprising to me to find that this is a club playing this process church style oriented music with the 9 Inch Nails, with the Thrill Kill Cults. And then again, these are the same bands and music scene that surround the Smiley Face Killers. So is it this? I'm not saying it's the same scene that's producing the Smiley Face Killers, but it seems like human sacrifice surrounds this scene, this music scene, through multiple decades.
And you got people going all over the place too.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's exactly it.
Thank God there was no mention of Peter Sotos. That's a real sicko. That's connected to the scene.
I still
a guy named Peter Sotos.
How do you spell that?
Don't look him up, please, because he's it's really, really demented and sick. Please don't subject yourself to that.
It's that dark, huh?
It's that dark. And he writes about the Ripper Crew, and he's connected to all these weird pedophilia cases, and he's also tapped in, I think, with that one grunge producer that used to produce stuff for Nirvana. Forget his name.
Steve Albini.
Albini, yes, he's connected to him.
Wax Track Records. Yeah, Steve Albini, the pedophile.
Yeah, exactly. What's interesting about this guy is he's also had this record shop in Chicago where all these like smiley face killers like happen to happen, and he's never talked about on any podcast or mentioned by anybody. I wonder why, but he's a real sicko. I have to
Albini.
say. No, Peter Sotos. I don't know about Albini.
No, Albini's
probably
he's a real sicko too. I've read some of the stuff he published regarding pedophilia stuff, like pro pedophilia.
So I didn't mean to take us off vampires. I just wanted to interject that about Peter Sotos. Don't look into his stuff, please don't. I'm begging you, please don't.
I'm not going to bring him up right now. However, I will be looking at him later because I'm interested in Steve Albini, from not only the Smiley Face Killer aspects, the Wax Track Records, Process Church Aspects. But yeah, he also produced Nirvana's #1 album, In Utero, which, you know, is very interesting to me, considering my my interest in the psychological operations surrounding the grunge scene in my series I like to call Smells Like Laurel Canyon. So it's interesting when these scenes cross over like that. But yeah, Albini's an interesting character in that mix for sure. I appreciate you bringing him up there, Doc. The when I think of these EDM clubs like the Asylum Club there in Dayton, I think of, you know, this is another recent instance of such activity. These deaths, these smiley face killer deaths.
Oh, New York
EDM
again.
Clubs.
New York again.
Yeah, Brooklyn this time. Yeah, Nick, are you familiar with this establishment, the Mirage?
Yes.
It's they have 3 SFK style victims last summer
Oh,
within like a 1 month period.
I know of this because you told me about it a while ago.
Yeah. Yeah, but so this was another example. We have two victims. They were kidnapped SFK style out of this, basically out and found in the water, you know, drowned. This all occurred in the last week of July, first week of August last summer, and then the very following week, a third guy disappeared from the same electronic dance music industrial rock club. They're in Brooklyn, New York, largest club I think in New York. That's indoor outdoor. It's quite a wild scene they have there, and there's a lot of interesting aspects around the ownership as well of that establishment. However, what's even more intriguing to me is the third instance here that happened last summer was a doctor. He was actually kidnapped. He was a Connecticut doctor, and I think 2 of the victims were actually doctors. One of them was a Goldman Sachs analyst. So to me, that speaks to these people being targeted at these nightclubs. So, you know, the idea of this one fella in Dayton showing up at a nightclub and, you know, being a random murderer, I don't think it's random. I think he's targeted. I think these men were targeted. A Goldman Sachs analyst and 2 doctors, right? The third man that they mentioned here, this headline, man kidnapped near Brooklyn Mirage makes 3rd disappearance this summer. He was found alive. He was kidnapped and held in Westchester County, in New York, of all places. So that story really hasn't completely unfolded to the best of my understanding as far as charges and stuff. There have been people charged that have not been adjudicated yet in those cases. However, you know, I don't think that the man in Dayton, Philip George Gall, died by any means of random chance. This would have been more of a, you know, in my opinion, more of a targeted situation, much like we see in the smiley face killer victims, and much like we see here with this Brooklyn situation. I think that's a lot of comparisons to be drawn there.
It's very very weird. One thing, I don't know why it comes to my mind, but like, I think it was kind of like the stuff that we're looking at in Austin with the smiley face killer stuff. Like, for some reason, I have a feeling maybe some of those venue places that have like that kind of put on the shows, because like some of those are actually technically a separate company from like the bar sometimes.
Yep.
Sometimes I have question, like, are those things, like, are they kind of involved, like the company itself? Because you'll see some people own a bunch of them, and it's like, you know, at all these bars where people seem to be like, getting dosed with disappearing from.
Sure. Yeah. 2 of the victims are in Brooklyn. We might have to cover that. They're on a smiley face killer show sometime. 2 of those victims were found in the creeks immediately next to the club. I mean, the places have been searched, you know, again, standard SFK cases.
Yeah, like Rainy Street.
Yep.
You see, that's even another stuff over in Austin. Those, I think, are actually really targeted people. And you're even thinking those are targeted people.
I think, I don't think these are random chance. I think these people are targeted. I mean, how do you go to the largest nightclub in New York City, EDM, industrial rock type stuff, right? And you come out of there with 3 victims. One's a Goldman Sachs analyst. One's a psychologist doctor. The other one's a medical doctor. This just doesn't scream like random. I mean, nothing about it speaks to random chance. It speaks to targeting to me. Like they're fitting a very specific profile. They're looking for a very specific type of person. It's not some dude. It's never a dude who lives in his mother's basement eating Cheetos and playing video games. I'm always looking for that SFK victim. And I'm like, oh, well, he weighs 300 pounds. He eats Cheetos, plays video games. Yeah, it's never the case. It's never the case.
Pretty similar body fat percentage.
Oh yeah.
That person in his basement, I'm fairly sure there's never been a confirmed vampire killing. I don't know if that's a related thing or not. I haven't
Stay
done
safe.
research.
Stay safe and stay in your mama's basement.
That's right.
There you go.
Domino's pizza.
Vampire risk mitigation and
There you
SFK
go.
risk
There you
mitigation.
go. Yeah.
Never leave the basement. All right. Well, I appreciate y'all joining me to talk vampires tonight here. I'll cue it up here to starting with the doctor. You got any closing statements for us there, Doctor?
Yeah, I want to thank you for bringing me on, JJ. It was great to meet
Absolutely.
everybody. Great to meet Lisa. Great to meet Nick. Great to meet Dan. Is also, as always, it's great to be here as well, JJ. And I hope I did educate as well as entertain.
No, for sure.
And also check out my podcast. Also, Demento Mori. I don't have many episodes now, but I am working on that. I do promise you.
If I can offer a plug for you there, Doctor, I would highly recommend any folks of interwebs to check out your recent appearance on the Farm podcast.
Oh yeah, check out my appearances on the Farm. Yes, please do.
Yeah, talking specifically the stoner.
The stoner noir
film genre. Yeah, that was some great stuff you guys did there. Well, Nick, Lisa, I appreciate your all's time as well. Appreciate you coming on and joining in the vampire conversation.
Thank
I hope
you
you
for the
enjoyed it as much as I did.
Always love hanging out with you, man. Had a good time. It was nice meeting both of you. It was fun.
Any plugs or closing statements for the folks?
Oh, you can go first.
Yeah, Twitter, Lisa. And if you are interested in reading a little more about some of the historical, esoteric, and occult history, which is historical history, but it's occultresearchinstitute.org, and a lot of contributors to that website. It's our website that people are basically discussing everything from true crime to mental manipulation to astrology, old occultists. So yeah, if you like to read.
Nice. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
And
JJ's stuff is
I'm also on there, so I'm a bit biased, but
yes, you are. A lot of good stuff. You got a lot of good stuff in there.
Yes. Thank you, JJ. And I had a great time. Thank you all. It was nice meeting you all. And I'll plug, I guess, the Occult Rejects. That's on YouTube and all major podcasts and BitChute and Mumble. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Nick. Dan, I think this before you provide any plugs or any outgoing messages, I think this is a comment for you coming in late. I'm laughing how the Simpsons always make it in our news cycle. I presume as a Springfield resident, that's more directed towards you.
There's a Springfield in every goddamn state, but of course it has to be the one in Ohio. What else is new?
So you have any, appreciate your time, Dan. Thanks for joining us here. You got any plugs or closing statements for folks?
Yeah, it was a fun one. Just check out, I've recently brought back my podcast. We did podcast for about 3 years and then took some time off, but it's back now, baby, on YouTube. Nice. I Wish I Was Laughing. Check that out on there. Midget Radio, myself and my partner in comedy, Wendy. And we're just out there having a good time.
Well, that's awesome. And I put everyone's links that y'all just dropped. I already have them in the show notes. So anyone listening to this or watching this, just look there in the show note links. So you will find links to the Occult Rejects, I Wish I Was Laughing, and some of the good doctors work there with the Farm. I believe I also have linked on there as well, at least his Twitter account at minimum, where you can find that information. All right. Well, on that note, I appreciate y'all joining me here to get a little GCD, and hopefully you'll come back again soon, and we'll have another conversation sometime. Out here. Thanks.
Well, that's it. That's the show here, folks. So the next time you're out on the town, visiting your local watering holes, or perhaps just meandering around, and you hear the unmistakable sounds of metal clanking, and you spot signs of a disturbance, well, check your six. Look in that garbage can, because you never can tell. The GCDs may be loose in your town.